Fantastic. Good morning, everyone. I'm excited to be here with you and a topic certainly that uh, I've been on, I guess, the last what, 15, 16 years. It wasn't until I moved to Indiana. I'm originally from the San Francisco Bay Area, Daly City, California, uh, specifically. But it wasn't until I moved to Indiana that I became aware that uh, being black was what could potentially work against me. In the Bay Area, I grew up around all kinds, and so kind of my own healing and inquiry. Education was my throughway to healing and awareness for me personally, and so uh, that has uh, that is materialized in teaching sociology, criminal justice in terms of cultural awareness for the last 15 years in higher education, more so the last 8 years teaching sociology, race-related sociologies. Um, so, uh, so I'm really excited to share. I have not taught the last couple semesters as what's playing out in our social backdrop is an exciting time, but to have to teach it and to uh, prepare to teach it, in the higher ed context, um, after about mm, 13 years of going, or 13 or 14 years of going strong, I've been taking the last year off to kind of recoup, rejuvenate, uh, and reengage. So, say all that to say that this has been an exciting opportunity to re-engage as I'm still in the process of taking a break and recouping. I do want to acknowledge one of my star students since I've been teaching here at Ball State, and she was actually the bridge to my being here this morning, Alexis Moore, who works with the host organization putting on this presentation, and so I'm really excited. And Alexis and Mariah have been very um, patient and accommodating, and working with me to be able to present this presentation to you this morning. I am going to challenge you that as we engage together, our time, that you listen for understanding and not necessarily agreement in America, that what's playing out, kind of in terms of discourse, particularly around race-related issues. We tend to listen to the degree that we agree with each other. And I'm going to challenge you to listen for understanding and move past, if you experience it, some resistance or even ideas that might challenge your your lived experiences or what you have known to be true for yourself up until this point. As an educator, I do lay a theoretical framework so that just before we hit those touch points in terms of main takeaways for today's presentation. I've entered into the chat. Uh, um, I've entered into the chat um, the uh, the OneDrive folder. That link is good for 48 hours. Many of the things that I will touch on today, you can go a little bit deeper into that folder and download them and and peruse at your own leisure. Let me just see here. I'm going to share my screen and pull up my presentation so that we can jump right in. I'm going to lean on um, um, the Indiana Coalition staff to moderate the chat so that I can focus on uh, the presentation. And I will pause. Wait 1 second here. Uh-oh, wait a minute. That's not the screen I want. All right. Start from the beginning. And let's get in. I want to start with a poem from Langston Hughes to begin to contextualize and lay a floor or foundation for our time together. Let's see here. Begin.
I too sing America. I'm the darker brother. They send me to eat in the kitchen when company comes. But I laugh and eat well and grow strong. Tomorrow I'll be at the table when company comes. Nobody'll dare say to me, eat in the kitchen then. Besides, they'll see how beautiful I am and be ashamed. I too am America.
So when Juneteenth was actually established as a national and federal holiday, as a sociologist, I'm fascinated with people watching. Uh, it, you know, I'll go to settings where there's a lot of folks, and I'll just sit back and observe. As a sociologist, that is so satisfying. And one of the things that I've done, you know, in the last several years is I'll go on social media, particularly sites that are dealing with things that are playing out in our social backdrop, i.e., the news or whatever have you, and not so much to study uh, the actual news article, but to study the comments. I'm fascinated, you know, by the commentary because it does give you some insight in terms of what people are thinking around a particular issue. And I remember coming across when this was Juneteenth was established as a national a federal holiday, that I read some commentary, and one stuck out in particular to me was "Oh great, another fake holiday." And I'll be honest with you, I was triggered when I heard that, but it was good, you know, to sit with that trigger and explore what was really at the root of my inner irritation around that comment. And it began to lay the foundation for um, how I open that up with the students that I teach. Um, because it brought me back to a larger question or a series of questions. Um, what is America, or who is America? If you would in the chat, drop a couple of your thoughts around that question. Who is America, or who is American? What does it mean to be American? Don't think too long about it, but what comes up for you right away? Go ahead and begin to drop some of those in the chat. And if I could get one of the Indiana Coalition staff to share what some of those thoughts are coming up.
Yeah.
Uh,
Uh, anyone who calls this country home,
okay, what else? Who is American? What does it mean to be American? Anyone else? What else are we getting? I'm not. Let me see if I can pull up the.
that's all we have right now.
That's all we have right now.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's fine. That's fine. Sit with that question, but as you sit with that question or those couple of questions,
We have a
um,
couple
I
more
want.
coming through.
Okay, just rip a few more of those off. Let's just hear what folks are thinking.
People that lived or currently live in this country being accepting of all individual rights over human rights to have opportunities, We were always told that America was a melting pot, but I just think of one word, broken. To me, being American is more of a label someone takes on for themselves. For example, many Americans identify more as the country they hail from, like Italian American. Um, Someone else said, I think it's difficult to pinpoint given our history as a colonizer country and being a product of colonization.
Yes. Yeah, that's good stuff. I want to play this clip from the documentary, The Color of Fear, Just Be American. When you're talking about race-related issues, there's a way in which, if we're not vigilant and observant, we can use the same language and not be aware that even though that we're using the same language, there are two totally different meanings behind the language and terms used, and also two different lived experiences or more than one lived experience behind the language and the terms that we're using. I want you to take this clip in from the documentary The Color of Fear. It's a clip, um, and it's an older because I remember my anthropology professor uh, uh, screening the entire documentary back in my undergraduate days of college. Take this in.
I'm a local boy, grown, raised right here in this small community. And when the subject of racism was mentioned to me, I found it extremely exciting because I grew up in this area with friends of all races. And we would read in the news, see on the television of racial struggles in other areas and could not comprehend how that could be and why they had to cause struggle and strife for each other. Why couldn't they be just like at home, happy and productive together? And I don't think that anybody should be any less than another. I grew up in this area right alongside the Native Americans, and some of them to this day are my dearest friends, and I like their cultures, yes. And I even seek after artifacts from their history, but there's no struggle or strife if we don't cause it. Do you think that we don't get excited as Americans when you say you are something other than just American? I got excited when Manoir said to us, he is Chinese American. Why can't he be just American and excited about being just American like David is?
But wait a minute, I just...
You know, he calls himself an American.
But I'm doing that for a very specific purpose.
Okay.
I'm doing it because I'm terming my identity as American to fight against the white supremacist notion that only white people merit the status of a title
American.
of American.
Well, I agree with that. I don't think we do.
I refuse to be segregated or to be allocated to a lower status by not being recognized as an American.
I like that attitude, and I think that's a correct and proper attitude. Whereas
I'm also Chinese.
Yes.
I'm very proud of that. And for a person to look at me and say, for a white person to look at me and say, you're just like me, we're both American, totally insults me because it denies my identity as a Chinese person, too.
You give us a hard time for being white and being American and being in control. I've never felt in control. I had vineyards and pear orchards for many years, and I employed many of your people, if you wish to call them that. They're my dear friends. To me, they are friends equal to any that I would have. I greet them. And now they come into my business and they just want to come in and say hi and talk to me.
There's something different that's happened. What's different that's happened for us, and I'm speaking as a people, borders on genocide, takeover, colonization. You know what happens to me when I pass a mission?
Yeah.
You know, It's not the same thing that happens to every group that passes a mission. There's something different. When I hear Father Unipercera, what do you think I think of? You know, it's not,
Conquistador.
it's chopping off hands,
Sure.
it's slavery, I mean, you know, that's what's different. And it gets tiring to not have that difference known. It gets tiring to not have that difference acknowledged and to have to keep talking about it. That's what gets tiring.
So I see here an attitude expressed by Utaka and by Roberto that says, how can I be an American? I can't. And so I won't. I'm going to cling to my heritage. Is this clinging the problem? Is this belief that you cannot become American the problem? For years I've said, why do these guys have such a problem being a color? Why can't they just be individuals and go out and make a place for themselves? And I hear you saying that we whites don't allow that, that we keep you down. Why aren't we just humans? I mean, why aren't we just brothers? I'm a local boy, grown.
Well, when we talk about race, there's a few interpretive lenses that I give students who are enrolled in my courses. Um, I give them a few interpretive lenses to begin to make more polished and refined uh, observations and understandings to be able to move through um, this social phenomenon that is just a way of life in our country. One of the texts that I use, it's actually entitled "The Matrix of Race," and the matrix refers to a way of thinking about race that reflects the intersecting, multi-layered identities of contemporary society, contemporary American society, and the powerful social institutions that help shape our understanding of race. If you look in that folder that I dropped in the chat, there's a social identity wheel exercise that on your own time you can work through that exercise. But the exercise is very useful because it helps us to understand that uh, there are many things that influence our sense of self and how we choose to show up in the world, all making up our identity. We're not just one thing. We're our individual and unique identities have several characteristics that have to be factored in to our understanding of our lived experiences, given the reality of race as a phenomenon at work in our society. Um, I want to just pause here, and I want to just for a couple minutes. Let me just see here. I want to hear from folks. I want to hear from folks what comes up for you, or either around the question that I pose: Who is American? What is American? Or what's coming up for you as you have taken in some of the things that I begin to unpack and share and open up, or even from the video clip. I see there's a quote: "Racism is so American that when you protest racism, they think that you're protesting America." That's a powerful thought. What so let's go let's hear from folks. You can either drop it in the chat, and you can feel free at this time to unmute and offer your contribution in that way. I don't want to just present and not allow you to take a breath and digest some of this stuff as it's coming up. If nothing, I can keep going, but I want to just at least open the opportunity for you to share what's coming up for you, if in fact you feel led to share.
I think it was interesting in the video when the guy was talking about, I don't feel, he said something about he doesn't feel in control. He has vineyards and different things, and he employs, and instead of talking about, I'm gonna use quotes like, instead of saying my employees, dot, 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 he said, I employ you people, your friends. Like, you know, that was interesting because he starts out saying, why don't we all just be one? And why does race matter? And then immediately points out a difference as I employ you people, your friends.
Mhm. I think one of the things that you raise is that uh, my time in higher ed and working with students, when we begin to explore the subject of race, racism, um, there's this understanding, there's this kind of and I don't want to say it in terms of a value judgment, but there's this naive kind of um, green understanding that race has to do with some of the heinous expressions like, you know, lynching, um, cross burnings, you know, race, the lens that I give students is race in America has to do with power and economics.
Mhm.
And so one of the things that you know, in your description or your contribution, what you've shared with us is that he speaks, you know, you get insight into his understanding or positionality that that he's that he's living and operating from. That's not a judgment, because so many times you and I are participating in the matrix of race, unaware, unconscious, and we had opportunity to witness some of that unconsciousness in what he had to say. Race fundamentally is about economics and power, positionality. I get power, I get opportunities, I have experiences at the experience of someone else, at the expense, excuse me, at the expense of someone else.
Mhm.
If you now, you know, lynchings, institutional expressions like Jim Crow or whatever, those are instruments or tools to that hold it and sustain it. But race fundamentally is about economics and power, and the tools or the acts of racism or the acts of racism are tools um, that hold it in place, that sustain that kind of caste system.
Mhm.
Uh, in watching the video, I noticed how physically affected I was in that every time there were statements made to demean or keep himself elevated above the others while still claiming to have no power. And he mentioned repeatedly that he grew up around various groups and knows them quote, but it appears that he was an observer, reminiscent of the human zoos that existed in the late 1800s. Yeah, people of color being a spectacle, fetishized, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, great observations. Um, and one of the things that I appreciate about uh, this lens is it helps us to make more refined and more nuanced observations when you look at the phenomenon of race through the lens of power and economics. Stay with me. I'm going somewhere, but I just want to lay this floor as we go into some of the more key points uh, for the entirety of the presentation. I'm going to begin sharing my screen again. Uh, but it may not land exactly at the same place that we left off. In the video, the man just seemed to reemphasize us versus them mentality. Yeah, good observation. And that one of the things that you know, because one day he says, why can't you just, you know, why do you have to be a color? Why can't we just all be American? And one of the things that we begin to understand is that um, for certain groups that there's a total different experience. Sociologist W.E.B. Du Bois talks about the color line or the veil, the color line when I understand when he uses that term in his writings, the color line, it's a line delineating culture and lived experience. And so those who are on one side of the color line who identify more with the dominant group in our society, and then versus those who are minoritized in our society. And notice the language that I'm using there: minoritized versus minority. I remember Dr. Doris, Xavier University, New Orleans, Louisiana, and he was in. My sister graduated there, and I remember her coming home for Christmas break, and she said, one of my professors, Dr. Doris, had said, he says, I'm not a minority. He says, he says, there's nothing minor about me. And he didn't say that from a place of arrogance, but he was saying that as a mention or an affirmation of his humanity. And so I prefer the term, I sat with that when for several years, and I prefer the term minoritized versus minority because the term minoritized indicates that there's a dynamic at work in our society that places me potentially at a disadvantage, kind of at default, versus minority suggesting, you know, something about my importance or placing some type of value in terms of my humanity. Uh, Let me just see if I can go find my place back on the presentation here. Now you've heard that part. I want to play this next this this next clip in response to what you just saw. All right. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. It looks like you, I don't know, maybe.
Did I lose my share?
Yeah, we're not seeing your screen shared.
Okay, sorry. Technical difficulty there. Let me see if we can correct that. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, fantastic.
There's a certain sort of silent consciousness about or what it means to be American that I sense coming from white folks that I'd like to talk about. Before I do that, I'd like to say one more thing that's hard about talking about racism, and that is that people of color are spilling their guts and doing education to white people. Let me explain to you how you've got this wrong. Let me explain to you how you've got that wrong. Let me explain. And then we get cross-examined, and it's like, well, maybe your problem is blah, 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 blah. And it's always, racism gets looked at as a person of color's problem, and it's not. We're like on the receiving end of the problem, but we're not the problem. I walk in a world where black people, where Latinos, where Asians, where Arabs, all these different people are experienced as problem people, and that, well, we're going to deal with the person of color problem when in fact racism is essentially a white problem. And that for you to understand racism is about, you're going to be so uncomfortable. You're going to be so different from who you see yourself to be now that, there's just no way for you to get it from where you're sitting. And I'm not saying that you could never get it. I mean that you need to step outside of your skin and step outside of what seems really comfortable and familiar to you and launch out into some real, for you, unknown territory. And you haven't gone out there like you haven't, gotten in proximity to black people, as you say, because you don't have to. And that's part of what it means to be American, to me, is to have all these things that you can do if you want to, that you don't have to do if you don't want to do. And there's a way in which American and white and human become synonyms. That why can't we just treat each other as human beings? To me, when I hear it from a white person, it means, why can't we all just pretend to be white people? I'll pretend you're a white person, and then you can pretend to be white. Why don't you eat what I eat? Why don't you drink what I drink? Why don't you think like I think? Why don't you feel like I feel? God damn it, I'm so sick and goddamn tired of hearing about that. I'm sick of that. That's what it means to be human being to me. That's what it means to be white. That's what it means to be American. Why don't you come the hell over here? That's what I hear every goddamn day. And you know that I can't come over there. You know that this skin and that this hair and that this way that I talk and that I think and I feel will never, ever get included because I'm unpalatable to this goddamn nation. I'm unpalatable. You cannot swallow me. You cannot taste me. You cannot feel me because you don't want to. You think that you can survive without me, but you can't, man. You think that, hey, it'll all be fine when we just treat each other like human beings. And what that says to me is, don't be yourself. Be like me. Keep me comfortable. Connect where I'm ready to connect. Come out to my place. Or maybe I'll come down and get some artifacts from your place. That is bullshit. When you say that your ethnicity is American, there is no American ethnicity. You had to throw away your ethnicity to become American. That's what it means. That's what it means. You give up who you are to become American. And you can pretend that it's okay because you're white. When we give up who we are to become American, we know that we're dying from it. You're dying from it too, but you don't know it necessarily. Get ethnic, you know? I'm not going to trust you until you're as willing to be changed and affected by my experience and transformed by my experience as I am every day by yours. I attended a school for the first time that was predominantly white, and I had white teachers.
Just want to sit with that just for a second more to, this is a pretty intense scene. And despite the intensity of the scene, what are the nuggets that we can distill from what Victor offered in response to the previous clip that I shared with you? Make very clear, when I talk about white, I'm not talking about skin. I'm talking about thought, a value system, attitude. Because I believe, depending on the decisions and the choices that we make, whiteness can have expression through any skin shade. This notion of whiteness being a value system, a perspective, a mental, goal-oriented value system. You can have white thought or whiteness operating in black, brown skin, any skin shade. And the truth of what I'm sharing, look at someone as simple as Jane Elliott, race educator who did the experiment in her classroom. And at the time that she did it, in the social backdrop, it was very controversial. But she was more committed to her humanity than she was any such notions of whiteness. What comes up for folks as you take in that clip? Um, and just very briefly in bullet point style, what are some of the, whether that be feeling or an insight nugget that you distilled from it? What comes up for folks? What comes up for folks around the notion of whiteness being a thought, a value system, a perspective that can have expression in anyone?
I like the statement that he said about like racism being a white problem because it really kind of made me reflect on like all the systems that we had that were like created for white people that they try to make seem like benefit black people, such as like the welfare system. Like that was not made to benefit us, and we're not even the sole people that use that system. And it just kind of really opened up the thoughts of like this is a system that they've created against us, but they want us to just uplift and be held to the same customs. But like literally everything put in place was to set us back. So how are we supposed to act like we're equal, especially if that's not acknowledged?
Excellent. Good to see you, Alexis. What else? What else comes for? Do we have anything in the? Oh, I've got something in the chat here. Giving up your race, ethnicity to be American. You give up. He says, yeah. He says we. He says you give up. You look at Irish in America, Italian in America. And so in my race-related sociology course, we contextualize that as a path to whiteness. Some of the, those early immigrants who came to the U.S. by way of through the gateway of Ellis Island, their existence was highly marginalized. And I teach my students that race in America shrinks or expands to fit its hegemonic agenda. That word hegemonic comes from the root word hegemon, just means to dominate. And when we talk about a dominant group, shrinks or expands. And when you talk about whiteness and you understand whiteness as a value system, an attitude, a perspective, a commitment to values, um, that becomes, that begins, you begin to make more sense of that, because then there are individuals who uh, uh, on the surface would appear not to be white, but the choices and decisions that they make and the actions that they take reinforce the values of whiteness. Yeah, so we say assimilation. White thought is for Black people to absorb into our culture versus really trying to understand theirs. Uh, the term Kujichagulia comes to mind. Second principle in Guzu Saba, to be able to define ourselves, to set our own standards according to our values. It's interesting because when we get into race talk, there's a way in which people experience it, and they experience some folks experience shame and guilt. I would challenge that notion of that guilt shame construct, and that when you really begin to take an honest look or deep dive into race, racial phenomenon, and the feelings that come up around that some would perceive to be guilt and shame or condemnation, it really isn't that. It's more so one coming in touch with their common humanity, with those who have the tendency to be vulnerable and marginalized and undermined in terms of living out their fullest potential. Guilt, shame, condemnation, that's not youthful, it's not constructive. and it's really not valid. I would, for many, the feelings that they have as they come into um, how race functions and operates in society, as they begin to see it for what it is. Uh, the disgust is them, coming in touch with their uh, common humanity, that awareness, that consciousness. Yeah, good stuff. I'm just kind of seeing some things here in the chat, like the "I don't see color" attitude is erasing and lacks accountability from those who identify as white. So, whiteness is not, because it's not, race, because it's not, uh, because it's a socially constructed phenomenon. There's a way in which we have to have tools and understandings that allow us to separate or disavow from its uh, social construction. Here are five key insights on race. Let me just my next slide here.
And I walked.
Five key insights on race. Race, one, is socially constructed. It has no biological basis. Race in America, in general, is narrative. We learn storylines that we draw upon to interpret what we see and experience. And these stories become embedded in our minds as truth, most times closing off other ways of seeing and sense making. Race is narrative. Uh, One of the next understandings uh, is that, let's see here, racial identity is relational and it's intersectional. Our racial identity is defined in our relationship to others and experienced in the context of other identities, gender, class, sexuality. Race is institutional and structural. Independently and together, various institutional structures, including family, school, community, religion, all influence our actions and beliefs about race. And then finally, we are active agents in the matrix. You and I move among a variety of social institutions in our country, and as we do, we contribute to their reproduction. You and I, make choices every day, often unconsciously, that either maintain or subvert uh, racial power dynamics and inequality in our society. Those five key insights. That comes from a text that I use in my course, The Matrix of Race, primarily by Professor Dr. Rodney D. Coates and his co-authors. Professor Rodney D. Coates um, is a sociology professor at Miami University in Ohio, not far from us. He's put together very, very comprehensive and easy to read written work in his Matrix of Race. I want to I want to share this um, and make some connections here because I know I've put out some things here. When we talk about Juneteenth, because this has been the uh, um, contextualization for our time together with this presentation. Um, when we talk about Juneteenth and going back to this this notion of it being a fake holiday or whatever that I shared with you that story. One of the things that, and I did this presentation last year. I did a different presentation last year with IU Health in Indianapolis uh, for their executive administrative team and several staff across the state. Uh, Juneteenth is a powerful holiday that yields a lot of lessons for us because while the larger understanding of Juneteenth um, has to do with um, freedom from the institution of slavery in America, uh, and it's actually more specific, more nuanced than that. In that Juneteenth is really uh, uh, a holiday that's been elevated and used for the larger group of African Americans. But originally, Juneteenth is the edict that came to Galveston, Texas, uh, June 19th, 1865. Galveston, Texas, is read. It was a military man who read the edict that the enslaved Africans uh, in Texas, specifically Galveston, Texas, they got word that that they were free and that their enslavement from a state standpoint had ended. Now, mind you, 2.5 years after President Lincoln's historic Emancipation Proclamation, it was U.S. Major General Gordon Granger who had issued uh, the uh, the order. And he says this date. I'm going to read for you that general order here as I pull it up for myself. He says the people of Texas are informed that in accordance with a proclamation from the executive of the United States, all slaves are free. I'm using this quote word for word. This involves an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former master and slaves, and the connection heretofore existing between them becomes that between employer and hired labor. Remember, race in America has to do with economics and power. The freedmen are advised to remain quietly at their present homes and work for wages. They are informed that they will not be allowed to collect at military posts and that they will not be supported in idleness either, there or elsewhere. How many of you before today had actually been exposed or read the general order um, uh, offered by U.S. Major Gordon Granger? That's the basis for the Juneteenth holiday. I can remember as a boy going to Juneteenth gatherings as my particularly on my mother's side from East Texas, Texarkana, Texas. If you study the migration patterns of Blacks in America, the Great Migration, um, those Black folks who were from the South in Texas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, parts of Arkansas, they tended to migrate west, landed in places like Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle, Portland. They were going for port jobs, whereas many Blacks who migrated from Mississippi, Tennessee, they migrated north, landed in primarily Chicago, Indianapolis. They were going for factory jobs, get on at the factory. Those Alabama um, migrated, uh, Detroit. And so if you were a betting person and you met Black folks who had been in Chicagoland or Detroit, and you understood the Great Migration pattern, it would aid you in your bet to 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 predict about what part of the South that their family was from. And so, as a boy, mom being from Texarkana, Texas, dad Benton, Louisiana, I went to Juneteenth gathering, um, and so that I had an awareness of Juneteenth and that nuanced part of American history, American Black history, more specifically. I had early exposure to that. Um, but it's interesting that in that general order that U.S. Major General Gordon Granger issued, that when I read it word for word, you begin to see what I asserted earlier on in the talk, that racism in America, less to do with the tools, the heinous tools that are used to hold it in place, more to do with power and economics. Let me just pull my screen here. What's coming up for folks? Somebody had said I had not heard or read the general order before now. I've had a few that had said that. What's coming up for folks? Does it make more sense? Let me see here. I'm reminded of Ibram X. Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist book and his idea that people of color can internalize racism. Yeah, internalized oppression and act, think, speak out of racial ideologies because of the influence of white supremacy within within our systems in society. Nikasia, great to see you on the presentation today. Thank you for joining us. One of my parents says that when they experience guilt or shame, they see it as an inherently selfish viewpoint, because in some ways it's taking accountability for a situation about yourself. When I think about this conversation, I see guilt or shame as connecting to humanity. Very good. That's right. But forcing the conversation to remain centered on white guilt or shame as making the conversation up. So yep, that's it, about whiteness again. Yeah. And so this is why, we have to contextualize um, um, uh, when we take this dive into race-related studies, we have to contextualize it as becoming more familiar and more in touch with our common humanity. It's not about guilt, shame, or blame. Uh, it's about, recognizing our history, acknowledging the horrific expressions of certain aspects of our history, so that we don't reproduce it, re-engage it, revisit it, redo it unawares. It's coming into a higher level of consciousness and awareness. It doesn't have anything to do, or shouldn't anyway, about guilt, shame, or blame, keeping us kind of stuck and stagnant. Uh, from the order you read, the words remain quietly. Yeah. In the same place makes me think again of the idea that white supremacy does not want to hear about the harm that people of color, in this instance, Black folks, have experienced. Yeah. 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 All very, very good and important um, uh, observations, distilled nuggets. Yes, absolutely. I want to keep going because I do want to create space for you all to just kind of openly share, ask questions, and let's engage a little bit. I have a clip that I want to um, uh, um, play for later, but I want to make a couple connections here before I do that. So I want to touch on the historic relationship between race and human trafficking. After all, the Indiana Coalition on human trafficking and work against sexual assault. When you understand human trafficking in principle, or or in substance. I want to just take the next couple of slides um, to make some connections and connect the dots to the work that our sponsoring organization for this presentation is engaged in, because there is a connection there that has to be made, should be made. Historic relationships between race and human trafficking. I define uh, um, slavery as practiced in America as one of the earlier expressions of human trafficking, apart from the definition established by the Department of Homeland Security here in our country. But you know, you remember I mentioned that race in America is about power and economics. We understand um, this whole, before landing on American shores, the process or the practice is called the transatlantic slave trade. It's transatlantic slave trade. What's the economic term in that phrase? Anybody? Go ahead and unmute yourself and just share if you have it.
Slave.
Yeah. Uh, but there's a more nuanced uh, economic term that's inherent in that phrase: transatlantic slave trade.
Trade.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. What you I got disconnected. Can you all hear me again?
Yeah, we can hear you.
All right, very good. My apologies for that. Just one of the realities of technical difficulties at times. Yeah, transatlantic slave trade. Uh, what's the so the first word that was mentioned is also an economic term, um, speaks to product or the what was the first term that was offered? I didn't get who offered that piece, but slave. Yeah, the product. The reducing the value of human life, and you have to dehumanize um, the quote unquote product in order to be able to continue in such a heinous expression of trafficking humans. Yeah. So their humanity is reduced. They become a product or property, slave. So transatlantic slave trade, another example or expression that points back to one of the points that I've made, is that, race in America has to do with power and economics. And there's a level of dehumanization that has to occur in order to be able to numb the consciousness of the heinous acts that's being done to other human beings. Let me pull my piece back up here so that we can see that. Uh, so you begin to see the relationship uh, between uh, economics and human trafficking. Human trafficking, as defined by the department, the formal definition as defined by the Department of Homeland Security, human trafficking involves the use of force, fraud, coercion to obtain some type of labor or commercial sex act in our modern day expression. It can happen in any community, and victims may be any age, race, gender, or nationality. Traffickers uh, 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 might use the following methods to lure victims into trafficking situations: violence, manipulation, false promises of well-paying jobs, romantic relationship. Taken directly, copy pasted from the Department of Homeland Security. Uh, for the purposes of our presentation and connecting some dots. Uh, Language barriers, fear of their traffickers, and or fear of law enforcement frequently keeps victims from seeking help, making human trafficking a hidden crime. Traffickers look for people who are easy targets for a variety of reasons, including psychological or emotional vulnerability, economic hardship, lack of social safety net, natural disasters, political instability. All are things that are leveraged uh, to be able to engage in the dehumanizing practice of human trafficking. I'm gonna. Am I stretching you all in terms of con connecting those dots or making that assumption? What's coming up for folks? Do you see a logical connection there in terms of the institution of slavery as practiced in our country as a type or in substance and an expression of human trafficking? You're free to unmute yourself and share and contribute. How many before today's presentation have ever made that connection? Let me see here. I see something here. Yep. So I'm gonna keep going. Uh, but yeah, we make this we talk about it frequently in our field. Yeah. Let me see here. All right. Let me there is there's one last clip that I want to play. One of the things in my years of teaching in higher ed is that I understand that I teach to a generation that's come up in social media, laptops, tablets, and I don't assume that that me talking the entire time will help students get the key points that I need them to make. And so, I've learned over the years that a well-timed, um, curated clip can accelerate the closure of gaps in the minds of students who come into my classroom. Um, it can, Sometimes a well-curated, crafted clip can do more in 3 or 4 minutes than I ever could in an hour and a half or 2 hours of lecturing. One of the reasons why I incorporate so much media because it accelerates the closure of those kind of comprehensive gaps. Um, let's see here. I'm not sure if you all have ever viewed the documentary by attorney Jeff Robinson, Who We Are, A Chronicle of Racism in America. It's used to be available, I believe, in Netflix. It's now available, I think, in Amazon Prime. But it's a fascinating, very compelling documentary that is absolutely well done. And I want to uh, cue that clip up for you if I can. But I love this clip that I'm going to share with you um, because I offered you those 5 key insights about race. That race is narrative, and we learn storylines that we draw upon to interpret what we see and experience. And these stories become embedded in our minds as truth, most times closing us off to other ways of seeing and sense making. Let's see if I can pull that clip up for you. Um, uh, and it's the last one that I'll share, and then I'll that'll conclude, and I'll leave time for some questions and answers session. Let's see here. Okay, share screen. Okay, I'm gonna get out of there. All right, can you all see my screen now? The clip that I'm queuing up?
Yes.
All right, fantastic. Thank you so much, Mariah.
Because that's what America is going to see. And all of a sudden, the surface skimming that I felt like I had been doing about on the
Actually, it's not
history of
showing us, it's
race
just
and
a
what
black
racism meant
screen,
in America.
but we can hear it.
Okay. Okay, give me 1 second here. Let me.
I had one of the best educations in America, and I started learning stuff about the history of race in this country that I had never heard before. And I thought, how could I not have known this? How
I'm gonna see if I can pull this in to where you can see this better.
Or maybe if you want to send me the link, maybe I can try to share it.
Okay. I'm accessing this through my Prime account. Let me see here.
There might be a block where you're not able to like actually show their content from their website.
Okay. Thank you for that. I can still play it for you. And we're gonna have to engage in kind of a radio expression. Is that all right? Uh, so they say radio is theater of the mind. So I want you to settle in here, but you can hear it. That's correct?
Yes.
Okay. I want you to hear this interchange and just take it in.
could I not have been taught this? And I started thinking, if I don't know this, I wonder how many other people don't know.
Slavery had nothing to do with the war. That was not the cause of the southern states seceding. That was not the cause of the first shot being fired on that fort over there. It was about money. And it was not about slavery. It was about moral tariffs. It was about more money. Lincoln wanted to impose 45% more taxes on the southern states.
Taxes on the goods the southern states were producing. And those goods were essentially cotton, tobacco, and rice.
Predominantly.
And those goods were produced by slave labor. All of it. Isn't that right?
No, I mean, the
95% of it? Isn't that right? If it's 95% produced by slave labor, enslaved people, and the North is saying, we're gonna tax you on that because we want some of that money, and the South is saying, no, wait a minute, we're the ones producing it, so you shouldn't be taking the money. That money wouldn't exist without slave labor. I mean, that did affect the bottom line. Wouldn't you agree with that?
they chose to stay. In most cases in the South, that's the way it worked, because they were treated as family. And they knew what they had. They didn't know what they were being faced with if they left.
So your view is that enslaved people were treated as family? Then why wouldn't it be all right for me to own you as long as I treated you like family?
If that's the way economics work.
Would you be satisfied with that?
In today's world.
In any world?
In today's time.
In any time?
No.
So was slavery evil?
Yes. I'm not denying that.
And this flag has nothing to do with that?
No. This was a soldier's battle flag.
I think I need to, I'm a little sick today, and so I'm just standing in the heat. Thank you for talking to me. I will say that. I appreciate that. Thank you very much for talking to me. I needed to walk away. I am definitely interested in engaging with people that don't agree but it seemed like facts were not that important to this gentleman. He knew that what he was saying made no sense whatsoever, but he believes it so deeply that he's unwilling to let go of it.
So when I talk about race being squarely about, or primarily about economics and power, the guy that he was engaging in discussion was holding a Confederate flag um, um, out on a port in front of a Confederate monument. Hence, you heard the horns honking as folks were driving by, kind of in support. And I know you didn't get a chance to see it, but you're able to hear it and have kind of a radio experience. Radio being theater of the mind. Um, um, but there, the gentleman that he was, or the guy that he was engaging, um, that whole conversation in that particular documentary underscores one of the assertions that I make in terms of the five key understandings about race. Race is narrative. They're storylines that shape and inform our understanding and thereby concretize our commitments, our values. Um, um, and I really appreciate that clip because it further underscores this this uh, this idea that race is narrative. We learn storylines that we draw upon to interpret what we see and experience, and those stories become embedded in our minds as truth, most times closing off other ways of seeing and sense making. Sense making. Juneteenth, as a national holiday, is a celebration to the end of state-sponsored human trafficking. We still have work to do because human trafficking in our country has taken on a different expression. Um, one of the things that I shared with you that I do is I take students in my race and ethnic relations class. We've been able to eliminate the textbook fee pretty much. And the course is now underwritten by our department, and there's a domestic travel component um, embedded in our course because of the locality of our university in its proximity to so many regional educational access. One of those places being the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center in Cincinnati, Ohio. They have this amazing exhibit. Invisible Slavery Today is the world's first museum quality permanent exhibition on the subjects of modern day slavery and human trafficking. And I remember when the Freedom Center made this installation, and I was a little, if I be honest, I was a little bothered because my initial kind of immature understanding and interpretation of the installation was that it was taking away from um, the main the main reason why the Freedom Center was erected in the first place. And as I continued to dive in and really began to understand and contextualize my learning and teaching of race relations in our country through the lens of looking at through a human rights and common humanity lens caused me to come into a great appreciation and affinity for this installation at the Freedom Center. Juneteenth, an important holiday. You saw the General Order number 3 um, that the U.S. Major General read. And you saw one of the things that whenever you're dealing with vulnerable populations and those individuals who are involved in sex trafficking, and the vulnerable population that that predatory practice is committed against. Vulnerable populations. I love that the general order number 3 and the nuggets that it allows us to see is that, I had shared with you that uh, the Emancipation Proclamation had almost been 2 years in place, and almost 2 years later, the enslaved Africans in Galveston, Texas, were just then getting the word. And one of the nuggets or lessons that we learned from that is that vulnerable populations must have the most highest accurate information in a highly timely fashion, so that so that it reduces their vulnerability, um, and oppression, or even risk of being oppressed or taken advantage of. That and so while much of Black America, a lot of Black America had been celebrating Juneteenth decades and decades before it ever became a federal national holiday. Um, many Americans, regardless of race, are just now coming into the awareness of that general order number 3 that notified enslaved Africans in Galveston, Texas, that the state-sponsored institution of slavery had come to an end. And so that's my thoughts. Those are some of the things that I really want to leave you with. What are coming up for folks? Questions, answers. I want to create that space and time. If you desire to connect, I'm available on LinkedIn, John W. Anderson Jr., EDD. What's coming up for folks? Some key takeaways, something that folks are open to share. It doesn't have to be deep. It doesn't have to be shallow, just whatever you feel comfortable sharing. What questions do you have? Questions or comments? I want to just open it up at this time. Appreciated your explanation of using minoritized versus minorities. Wonderful. Yeah, those are conceptual understandings that really open up and being able to see certain social dynamics for what they really are. Very good. Thank you for sharing that. What else? What else came up for folks? What questions do you have for me? All right. Well, I hope you found it useful. I'm happy to hang on and another minute. Like I said, I'm on LinkedIn if you'd like to connect that way. And or if something occurs to you in the way of a question or a comment later that you'd like to share with me, feel free to connect in that way as well. I had, yeah, I had heard race was socially constructed, but I particularly found the race is a narrative component useful. Beautiful, beautiful. I had a student named Rebecca Parker. Interesting, interesting. Yeah, thank you for sharing, Rebecca. This was very powerful. Thank you, Erica Hamilton. Thank you, Erica, for spending some time today to join us and um, be exposed to some of these ideas and conceptual frames. My hope is that for our sponsoring organization, Indiana Coalition, that you all found this useful in terms of the work that you all are doing. I applaud your work. I appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to share with your group and those who took advantage. Do you think there will ever come a day where it won't be racial disparity? What would it take? One of the things that we learned, Megan, um, is that um, whether it takes a different expression, our default settings as humans, kind of that primitive, unrefined or uncivilized expression is that kind of scarcity mindset, that competitive mindset. Um, if it isn't a race as we understand it in our country, creating some type of caste system that has one group up at the expense of another, it'll take form in another fashion. And that's why toward the end of the presentation, I tried to make the connection between the work that Indiana Coalition is doing in terms of sex trafficking, sexual assault, and made that connection to an earlier expression of human trafficking in terms of the transatlantic slave trade and the institution of slavery as practice in our country. You and I have to expand our consciousness and awareness and move on from competition to collaboration, from a scarcity consciousness to an abundance consciousness. This idea, this abundance consciousness that there's plenty on the earth for everyone, and that we don't need to engage in very primitive practices that are rooted in competition and scarcity consciousness that causes us to commit heinous acts against each other in terms of our common humanity. I think that level of consciousness and awareness is growing, and there are those who have that understanding that one day the balance of that will shift in such a way that we'll recognize and see it more times than not. But I don't know that it'll ever be all the way erased. To answer your question, do I think that there will ever come a day where there won't be racial disparity? And what would that take? I think it's going to take abandoning certain default settings and coming into more refined expressions and understandings and awarenesses of uh, uh, our common humanity, and embracing awarenesses like abundance, um, uh, uh, love for our common humanity, and acknowledgement of our common humanity. Yeah, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Life, the acknowledgement of my humanity. Liberty, the liberty to define my humanity as I see fit, so long as it doesn't infringe upon yours. Pursuit of happiness, to pursue my humanity as I've defined it, without any um, interruptions um, of how I define my humanity, interruptions of any of the isms that come from a place of fear, uh, um, um, scarcity, and some of the other kind of really unrefined, uncivilized expressions and understandings. Well, that's my time, and I appreciate you all so much for joining me and sticking with me. Hopefully, you found this useful. Continue to be courageous and do the work, and expose yourself to ideas that will cause you to transcend and evolve in a way that make our common existence a better place. Take care now. Bye.
Thank you so much, John. We really appreciated your presentation. I just want to let everybody know this was recorded, and we will be putting it through your online registration that you did for this presentation. So if you guys have any questions, if you want to follow up with me about maybe John's contact information or anything like that, please let me know. And